Deep in the lower sections of Station Lumina, where the lights flickered and the air tasted like metal and oil, an old dragon moved a crate across the floor. His name was Cairn, and his scales had lost their shine years ago. They looked gray and dull, like old stone that had been left out in the rain too long. His wings hung at his sides, patched with synthetic material that didn't quite match his natural hide. Every movement he made seemed to take effort, as if his body was fighting against him with each step. The cargo bay stretched out around him, filled with containers of all sizes. Some held food supplies for the station's restaurants. Others contained machine parts, medical equipment, or personal belongings for the thousands of creatures who lived on Lumina. Cairn's job was simple. Move things from one place to another, load the transports, unload the deliveries, keep the flow of goods moving through the station's veins. A group of younger aliens worked nearby. There was Hicks, an insectoid trill with shimmering green chitin and 6 arms that could manipulate tools with frightening speed. Beside him stood 2 Sark laborers, reptilian beings with powerful builds and scales that actually gleamed under the cargo bay lights. They were everything Cairn was not: young, strong, quick, and proud of their abilities. Hicks watched Cairn struggle with a particularly heavy container and clicked his mandibles in what passed for trill laughter. The sound echoed across the bay, sharp and cutting. "Look at the mighty dragon," Hicks said, his voice dripping with mockery. "I heard stories when I was young. They said dragons could tear apart starships with their claws. They said dragons breathed fire that could melt through battle armor. They said dragons were the greatest warriors in the galaxy." One of the Sark workers joined in, his voice a deep rumble. "My grandfather told me those same stories. I think they were just fairy tales to scare children into behaving. Look at him. He can barely lift a standard cargo container. Some warrior," the other Sark nodded. "I bet he made up that story about being a dragon. Probably just some random creature wearing a costume. Real dragons never existed, just myths and legends." Cairn didn't respond. He never did. He had learned long ago that words rarely changed minds, and defending himself would only invite more mockery. Instead, he focused on his task. The container needed to reach the loading dock by the end of the shift. That was what mattered. He positioned his shoulder against it and pushed, his clawed feet scraping against the metal floor as he sought purchase. Around his thick neck, Cairn wore a metal tag. It was old, covered in scratches and dents from decades of wear. The symbols etched into its surface had faded, making them difficult to read even if someone bothered to look closely. Most beings on the station assumed it was a standard identification marker, the kind that every worker wore to access different sections and log their hours. Nobody had actually read it in years. The workday continued its slow crawl toward evening. More ships docked at the station. More cargo needed moving. Cairn worked steadily, ignoring the comments and jokes that followed him like shadows. He had been doing this for so long that the routine had become almost meditative. Lift, carry, set down, return. Over and over until his muscles ached and his joints protested. That was when the human ship arrived. The Wayfarer wasn't a large vessel by galactic standards. It was a medium-range cargo hauler, built by human hands in the Sol system and designed for reliability rather than speed or luxury. It limped into dock with one of its stabilizer fins damaged and scorch marks along its hull that suggested a recent encounter with something unpleasant. Pirates, most likely, or maybe just bad luck in an asteroid field. The docking clamps engaged with a heavy thud that resonated through the cargo bay. Cairn barely looked up. New ships came and went every day. The humans were relative newcomers to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 50 years. They were curious creatures, ambitious and adaptable, though most other species still considered them primitive compared to civilizations that had been exploring space for millennia. A few minutes later, a human emerged from the airlock corridor. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s by human standards, with dark hair and bright, inquisitive eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore the practical jumpsuit of a ship's engineer, with grease stains on the knees and a tool belt hanging from his waist. His identification patch read Owen. Owen stopped just inside the cargo bay, looking around with obvious interest. His gaze swept over the stacked containers, the loading equipment, and the various aliens working throughout the space. Then his eyes landed on Cairn, and something shifted in his expression. Not mockery or pity, but genuine curiosity. Most beings looked at Cairn and saw a broken old creature barely worth their attention. Owen looked at Cairn and seemed to see something else entirely. He walked over, his boots clanging against the metal floor. "Excuse me," Owen said, his voice polite. "I'm looking for replacement parts for a damaged stabilizer fin. The automated directory system sent me down here, but I'm not sure where to start looking. This place is huge." Cairn turned his head slowly, regarding the human with ancient eyes that had seen more than this young creature could possibly imagine. He gestured with one clawed hand toward the far side of the bay. "Section 7, Cairn said, his voice deep and rough from years of minimal use. "Third row from the left. Ship components are sorted by size and type. You'll find stabilizer parts near the back." Owen nodded his thanks, but he didn't immediately walk away. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes drawn to the metal tag around Cairn's neck. The human tilted his head slightly, squinting at the faded symbols. "That's old Galactic script, isn't it?" Owen asked. "I've been studying it as a hobby. The way the characters connect at the base and that specific curve on the vowel markers. That's definitely pre-Council era writing." Cairn felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in decades. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe something closer to hope. This human could read old Galactic script. Most modern beings couldn't even recognize it, let alone understand it. Before Cairn could respond, Hicks scuttled over, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Don't waste your time with the old fossil," Hicks said to Owen. "He's been here forever, barely does his job, and definitely isn't worth talking to. Trust me, human, you're better off just getting your parts and leaving." Owen glanced at Hicks, then back at Cairn. The human's expression hardened slightly. "I'll decide who's worth talking to," Owen said quietly. Then he leaned closer to Cairn's tag, his lips moving as he worked through the translation. Cairn stood perfectly still, waiting to see if this human would be the first being in decades to actually read what the tag said. Owen's finger traced the symbols on Cairn's tag, moving slowly from one character to the next. His brow furrowed in concentration as he worked through the translation. Around them, the cargo bay continued its normal rhythm of activity, but the human seemed completely absorbed in his task. Hicks watched with growing impatience. His 6 arms crossed in various positions across his chitinous body. The other workers had paused their tasks as well, curious about what had caught the human's attention. It wasn't often that anyone paid this much attention to the old dragon. Most days, Cairn was practically invisible, just another piece of equipment that happened to be alive. "This is ridiculous," Hicks muttered. "Human, there are at least 40 ships waiting for cargo transfers. We don't have time for you to stand around staring at an old worker's identification tag. Whatever you think you're reading, I promise you it's not important." Owen held up one hand, asking for silence without taking his eyes off the tag. His lips continued to move as he translated the old Galactic script in his head. The symbols were complex, each one representing not just a sound but often an entire concept or idea. It was a language designed for precision and clarity, used by the first spacefaring civilizations when they needed to communicate across species barriers. Cairn remained motionless, his ancient eyes fixed on some point in the distance. He had long ago made peace with his decision to let the past stay buried. The tag told the truth to anyone who could read it, but that had always been the point. If someone cared enough to look closely, to actually read the words instead of just glancing at the surface, then perhaps they deserved to know. If they didn't care, then the information stayed hidden in plain sight. "Warden," Owen said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear. "That's the first word. Warden Cairn. Not worker, not handler, not technician, warden." The cargo bay went silent. Even Hicks stopped clicking his mandibles. The word hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications that none of them fully understood yet. Owen continued reading, his voice growing stronger as he worked through the symbols. "Seventh Flame, that's a title, I think. Defender of the border reaches. Guardian of..." He paused, counting something on the tag. "Guardian of 300 worlds." One of the Sark workers laughed nervously. "That's impossible. Nobody guards 300 worlds. That would require a fleet of thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. This is just some kind of joke or mistake in the records." But Owen wasn't finished. He kept reading, his expression changing from curiosity to something approaching awe. "Commendation for valor at the Battle of Crimson Nebula. Commendation for sacrifice at the Siege of Outer Rim. Commendation for..." He looked up at Cairn. "There are dozens of these. Battle after battle, conflict after conflict, all dated before the Galactic Council was even formed. Cairn finally moved, turning his head to look directly at Owen. The human met his gaze without flinching, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Respect. An understanding that some truths carried weight that went beyond words on a metal tag. "You fought in the old wars," Owen said. It wasn't a question. "You were one of the original peacekeepers. Before the Council, before the modern alliances, before most of the current civilizations even reached the stars." Hicks moved closer, his earlier mockery replaced by uncertainty. "That can't be right. The old wars ended centuries ago. Anyone who fought in them would be dead by now. Except..." He trailed off, his compound eyes focusing on Cairn with new intensity. "Dragons. I remember now. Dragons were supposed to have extraordinary lifespans. Some of the ancient texts said they could live for thousands of years." Cairn let out a long, slow breath. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of all those centuries. "The wars ended. The galaxy found peace. The Council formed and brought order to chaos. My kind were no longer needed as we had been. Most of my brothers and sisters chose to fade away, to find quiet corners of space where they could rest after so many battles. Some went into deep sleep waiting for a time when they might be needed again. But not you," Owen said. "Not me," Cairn agreed. "I chose to stay useful. The galaxy still needed work done, just different kinds of work. Moving cargo, maintaining stations, keeping the small machinery of civilization running smoothly. These tasks matter. They may not be glorious, but they serve a purpose." Owen pulled out his datapad, his fingers flying across the screen. Within seconds, he had accessed the Galactic Historical Database, searching for information about dragons and the old wars. The results that appeared made him go pale. "It's all true," Owen said, turning the datapad so the others could see. Dragons were the original peacekeepers of this entire sector. Before the Council existed, before the trade alliances, before the current governments, dragons maintained order. They could survive in the vacuum of space without protection. They could travel between stars using their own bodies. They fought off invasion fleets single-handedly and protected entire civilizations from extinction. The historical records showed images, ancient and grainy, but still clear enough. Dragons in their prime, massive and magnificent, their scales gleaming like metal in starlight. Dragons fighting against ships and creatures that threatened innocent worlds. Dragons standing as guardians at the borders of known space, turning back threats that would have consumed everything in their path. Hicks stared at the images, then at Cairn, then back at the images. The resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of the skull, the curve of the claws, the way the wings attached to the shoulders. This was the same species, the same type of being. The only difference was age and wear. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Hicks asked, his voice much smaller than before. "Why let us mock you, treat you like you were nothing special, act as if you were just some broken old creature barely worth keeping around?" Cairn gestured at the cargo bay around them. "Because this is what I chose. I didn't want to be feared or worshipped. I wanted to be useful. The tag tells the truth to anyone who cares enough to read it. You all had the opportunity every single day. You simply chose not to look." Owen studied Cairn with new eyes, seeing past the dull scales and patched wings to the being beneath. The last line on the tag. "I can barely make it out because the engraving is so worn." "What does it say?" Cairn was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Voluntary service continuation. No rank recognition required. It means I chose this life. I chose to give up my titles, my authority, my position. I chose to serve in the simplest way possible, asking for nothing in return except the chance to be useful." A proximity alarm suddenly blared through the cargo bay, making everyone jump. Red warning lights began to flash along the walls. The station's automated announcement system crackled to life, speaking in the flat, emotionless tone of artificial intelligence. "Alert. Multiple unauthorized vessels approaching Station Lumina. All personnel report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Owen looked at his datapad, pulling up the station's external sensors. What he saw made his blood run cold. A fleet of ships was approaching the station, their weapons already charging. The lead vessel was massive, bristling with illegal armaments and flying the colors of Drask's pirate fleet. Hicks's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of Trill panic. "Drask, that's Drask's fleet. They're the most violent pirate group in this entire sector. They don't negotiate, they don't take prisoners, and they don't show mercy. The other workers began running toward the emergency exits, abandoning their posts in their rush to reach safety. Only Owen remained near Cairn, his engineer's mind already calculating escape routes and defensive options. Cairn stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, for the first time in decades, something changed in his posture. His spine straightened. His shoulders rolled back. His wings, those patched and broken wings that everyone had mocked, began to spread. Owen took a step back, his eyes widening. Beneath the synthetic patches, beneath the appearance of damage and age, Cairn's true wings were still intact. They had been healing, waiting, hiding their strength behind a disguise of weakness. The synthetic patches on Cairn's wings began to fall away like dead leaves in autumn. They hit the cargo bay floor with soft thumps, revealing the true membrane beneath. The material wasn't dull gray like his scales appeared to be. Instead, it shimmered with a deep, rich color that seemed to shift between crimson and gold depending on how the light hit it. Veins of what looked like liquid fire ran through the wing membrane, pulsing with energy that had been dormant for decades. Owen stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a cargo container. His engineering mind tried to process what he was seeing, but the transformation happening before him defied everything he understood about biology and physics. Cairn wasn't just standing straighter. He was changing, growing, becoming something that matched the ancient images Owen had seen in the historical database. Throughout the station, chaos was spreading. The pirate fleet had already breached the outer defensive perimeter, which was designed to handle disputes and minor threats, not a full military assault. Explosions echoed through the corridors as Drask's forces blasted through bulkheads and security checkpoints. Screams and alarms mixed together into a symphony of terror. In the cargo bay, Hicks was frozen in place, his 6 arms trembling. The Sark workers had abandoned any pretense of courage and were scrambling toward the emergency exits along with everyone else. But the evacuation wasn't going smoothly. A section of the ceiling suddenly collapsed near one of the main exits, blocking the path with twisted metal and sparking electrical conduits. Several workers were trapped on the wrong side, including Hicks and a group of civilian merchants who had been waiting to collect their shipments. "Help!" Hicks shouted, his voice high with panic. "We're trapped. The bulkhead is collapsing." Owen ran toward the trapped group, his datapad already out as he tried to access the station's emergency systems. But the controls weren't responding. The pirate attack had damaged or corrupted the main computer network. Manual override would take too long, and the trapped workers were in a section that was rapidly losing atmosphere. Warning lights flashed red above the sealed doorway, indicating dropping oxygen levels. Cairn watched for a moment, his ancient eyes taking in the situation with the practiced assessment of someone who had faced countless emergencies across centuries of service. Then he moved. Not with the slow, labored steps of an old cargo handler, but with the fluid grace of a predator. His clawed feet barely seemed to touch the floor as he crossed the distance to the collapsed bulkhead. "Get back," Cairn said, his voice deeper than before, resonating with an authority that made everyone obey instantly. He placed both hands against the twisted metal, his claws finding purchase in the wreckage. The muscles in his shoulders bunched and flexed. Then he pulled. The sound of tearing metal filled the cargo bay, loud enough to momentarily drown out even the distant explosions. The collapsed bulkhead, which must have weighed several tons, came apart in Cairn's grip like paper. The trapped workers rushed through the opening, gasping for breath. Hicks stumbled out last, his legs shaking so badly he could barely walk. He looked up at Cairn with a mixture of fear and awe. "Thank you," Hicks managed to say. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I said, for how I treated you, for—" "Later," Cairn interrupted. "Get to the emergency shelters. Take the others. Stay low and stay quiet." More explosions rocked the station. These were closer now, coming from the upper levels. Drask's pirates were moving fast, overwhelming the station's security forces through sheer numbers and firepower. On Owen's datapad, the casualty reports were already climbing. Station Lumina wasn't a military installation. It was a trading hub, filled with civilians and merchants who had no training for combat. Owen looked at Cairn, then at his datapad, then back at Cairn. "The pirates are hitting the residential sectors next. There are families there, children. They're not warriors or fighters. They're just people trying to live their lives." Cairn's eyes narrowed. A thin trail of smoke began to rise from his nostrils. His scales, which had appeared dull and gray for so long, were beginning to change color. The gray was fading, replaced by a deep burnished bronze that seemed to glow from within. The transformation was accelerating, as if decades of carefully maintained dormancy were burning away in seconds. "Captain Reed is on the Wayfarer," Owen said, checking his datapad. "I need to get back to the ship. We have weapons, not much, but maybe enough to help with the evacuation." "No," Karen said. "Your ship is damaged. The stabilizer fin you came here to repair makes it vulnerable. If you try to fly in combat conditions, you'll spin out and crash. You'll die and your crew will die with you." Owen opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The dragon was right. The Wayfarer could barely maintain stable flight in calm conditions. Trying to maneuver during a battle would be suicide. "Then what do we do?" Owen asked. Cairn turned toward the sounds of combat, his wings now fully spread. They were massive, spanning nearly 20 meters from tip to tip. The membrane between the bones was translucent, allowing light to pass through and create patterns of shadow and flame on the cargo bay floor. "You go to your ship," Cairn said. "You seal the airlocks and you wait. Tell your captain that the situation is being handled. Tell the other ships to do the same. Stay docked, stay sealed, stay safe. And what are you going to do?" Cairn looked at Owen with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, that had witnessed battles that reshaped entire sectors of space. "What I was made to do, what I have always done, whether anyone remembered it or not. I'm going to protect the innocent." Before Owen could respond, Cairn moved. He didn't walk toward the exit, he leaped. His wings caught the air with a sound like thunder, and suddenly he was airborne, flying through the cargo bay with impossible speed. He hit the main doors at full force, tearing them from their hinges, and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Owen stood alone in the empty cargo bay, his heart pounding. Around him, emergency lights continued to flash, and the distant sounds of combat echoed through the metal walls. He looked down at his datapad, which was tracking Cairn's progress through the station using the identification tag signal. The dragon was moving fast, faster than should have been possible in the confined corridors of a space station. He was heading directly toward the heaviest fighting, toward the sections where Drask's pirates were slaughtering anyone who resisted. Owen made a decision. He started running toward the Wayfarer, but not to hide. He needed to warn Captain Reed, needed to make sure the other ships knew what was happening. More than that, he needed to document this. If Cairn was really one of the legendary dragons from the old wars, if he was really about to face down an entire pirate fleet alone, then someone needed to record it. Someone needed to make sure the galaxy remembered that heroes didn't always wear shining armor or carry gleaming weapons. Sometimes they wore dull gray scales and worked in forgotten cargo bays, waiting for the moment when they were truly needed. In the upper levels of the station, Drask's pirates were celebrating their easy victory. They had expected more resistance, but the station's security forces had crumbled within minutes. Now they were moving through the residential sectors, taking whatever they wanted and killing anyone who tried to stop them. Drask himself was on the command deck of his flagship, watching the carnage through his ship's external cameras and laughing at the chaos below. Then one of his lieutenants called out, pointing at a monitor. "Sir, we have a problem. Something is coming from the lower levels. It's moving fast, taking out our teams one by one." Drask walked over to the monitor, his massive frame casting a shadow over the tactical display. He was a Krelin, a species known for their size and aggression. His body had been augmented with military-grade implants that made him even more dangerous. Scars crisscrossed his face, each one a trophy from past battles. He wore armor that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons, and his weapons were powerful enough to breach starship hulls. On the monitor, a blurry shape was moving through the station corridors. The image quality was poor because of interference from the explosions and fires, but Drask could make out something large and winged. "What is that?" Drask asked. His lieutenant checked the sensor readings, confusion evident on his face. "I don't know, sir. It's giving off massive heat signatures, but it's biological, not mechanical. Whatever it is, it just disabled 12 of our assault teams in under 3 minutes." Drask smiled, showing teeth filed to sharp points. "Finally, some real resistance. I was getting bored with this easy raid." Cairn moved through the corridors of Station Lumina like fire through dry grass. His wings folded tight against his body, allowing him to navigate the narrow passages without hindrance. Each step left small scorch marks on the metal floor, evidence of the heat building within him. The transformation was complete now. The old, tired cargo handler was gone, replaced by what he had always been beneath the disguise, a weapon forged in the crucible of ancient wars. The first group of pirates didn't see him coming. They were busy tearing open a locked apartment, laughing as they terrorized the family inside. 3 of them, 2 armed with plasma rifles and 1 with a heavy combat blade. They heard the sound of claws on metal and turned, expecting to see one of the station's pathetic security guards. Instead, they saw death coming for them on bronze wings. Cairn didn't kill them. That was important. He could have incinerated them with a single breath, could have torn them apart with his claws. But killing was the last resort, not the first action. Instead, he moved with surgical precision. His tail whipped around, catching the first pirate in the legs and sending him crashing to the floor. His wing swept out, knocking the plasma rifle from the second pirate's grip before the weapon could fire. The third pirate tried to stab him with the combat blade, but the weapon simply scraped off Cairn's scales, unable to penetrate the ancient armor. 3 seconds. That was all it took to disarm and disable 3 armed pirates. Cairn left them groaning on the floor. Their weapons melted into useless slag by a brief pulse of heat from his breath. Then he moved on, following the sounds of screams and weapons fire deeper into the residential sector. Behind him, the family he had saved peered out of their apartment, stunned and confused. The mother held her children close, whispering prayers in a language that predated the Galactic Council. She had heard stories from her grandmother about the old guardians, the dragons who protected the weak when no one else would. She had thought they were just fairy tales, myths to comfort children. Now she knew differently. Cairn found the next group of pirates in a market square where they had cornered a group of civilians. These pirates were more organized, moving in a tactical formation with covering fire and coordinated movements. They saw Cairn approaching and immediately opened fire. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the air, enough firepower to reduce most beings to smoking ash. The weapons hit Cairn's scales and simply stopped. The plasma dissipated harmlessly across his hide. The kinetic rounds bounced off like raindrops. He walked through the storm of fire without slowing, his eyes fixed on the pirates with the calm intensity of someone who had faced far worse threats than these petty criminals. When he was close enough, Cairn opened his jaws and breathed. Not a wide blast of flame, but a focused beam of superheated plasma, precise as a surgical laser. The beam cut through the pirates' weapons, melting barrels and power cells without touching the beings holding them. The weapons exploded in their hands, forcing them to drop the useless metal and retreat. "Run," Cairn said, his voice carrying across the market square. "Leave this station. Tell Drask that the border reaches have a guardian again. Tell him that his mercy is a gift he should accept while it's still offered." The pirates ran. Some of them were crying. Others were praying to gods they had stopped believing in years ago. All of them understood on a level deeper than conscious thought that they had encountered something far beyond their ability to fight. The civilians Cairn had saved began to emerge from their hiding places. An old Keldan merchant, his scales gray with age, approached carefully. His eyes were wide with recognition. "I know what you are," the merchant said. "My grandfather told me stories. He was alive during the last days of the old wars. He said he saw a dragon once protecting a refugee convoy from raiders. He said it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he ever witnessed." Cairn nodded acknowledgement but didn't stop moving. There were more pirates in the station, more civilians in danger. He could hear them, could sense them through the vibrations in the station's structure and the heat signatures that painted pictures in his mind. The battle was far from over. On the command deck of his flagship, Drask watched the monitor with growing anger. His pirates were retreating from multiple sections of the station, driven back by a single creature. A single creature that was systematically dismantling his entire assault force without killing a single pirate. The humiliation of it burned worse than any weapon. "Bring me my armor," Drask commanded, "and prepare my personal weapons." "I'm going down there myself." His lieutenant hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we should withdraw. Whatever that thing is, it's not worth the losses we're taking." Drask grabbed the lieutenant by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one augmented hand. "I built my reputation by never backing down from a fight. Do you think I'm going to run from some oversized lizard? If the station has a guardian, then I'll tear that guardian apart and mount its head on my wall." He threw the lieutenant aside and began putting on his combat armor. The suit was a masterpiece of illegal military technology, incorporating shields strong enough to deflect ship-mounted weapons and strength enhancers that could let him punch through reinforced blast doors. His primary weapon was a plasma cannon originally designed for light assault vehicles, modified to be handheld and powerful enough to vaporize armored troops. While Drask prepared for battle, Cairn continued his march through the station. He moved from section to section, finding pirates and neutralizing them with minimal force. Some he simply scared away with his presence. Others required more direct intervention, but in every case he held back from lethal force. These were criminals, yes, but they were still living beings. They deserved a chance to change, to choose a better path. Not everyone saw it that way. A group of station security guards found Cairn in one of the shopping districts, standing over a pile of disabled pirates. The guards had their weapons drawn, unsure whether to treat the dragon as a threat or an ally. "Stand down," their commander ordered, recognizing what Cairn was doing. "He's helping us. He's saving lives." One of the younger guards, a Sark named Dex, lowered his weapon reluctantly. "But what is he? Where did he come from?" "I've worked on this station for 3 years, and I've never seen anything like him." The commander, a grizzled veteran named Paul, smiled grimly. "You've probably seen him every day, Dex. You just didn't know what you were looking at. Sometimes the most powerful protectors are the ones who don't need to advertise their strength." Word was spreading through the station now, carried by survivors and witnesses. The old dragon from the cargo bay, the one everyone had mocked and dismissed, was fighting off the pirate attack single-handedly. The story grew with each telling, embellished with details both true and exaggerated. But the core truth remained constant. Someone was standing between the innocent and those who would harm them, and that someone had been there all along, waiting in the shadows for the moment they were needed. Owen had made it back to the Wayfarer and briefed Captain Reed on everything he had seen. Reed, a practical woman with decades of command experience, believed him immediately. She had been in space long enough to know that the galaxy held wonders and terrors beyond human imagination. "Seal the ship," Reed ordered. "Make sure everyone stays inside. If Owen's right about this dragon, then the last thing we want is to get in his way or make him think we're part of the threat." Through the Wayfarer's external cameras, they watched as the station's nightmare began to turn into something else. Pirates were fleeing back to their ships, their assault broken by a single defender. The casualty reports, which had been climbing steadily, began to level off and then drop as medical teams could finally reach the wounded without fear of being attacked. Then Drask emerged from his flagship, and everything changed. The pirate warlord dropped through the station's docking bay ceiling, his armor's thrusters controlling his descent. He landed with a thunderous crash that cracked the metal floor beneath him. His plasma cannon was already charging, energy building in its core with a high-pitched whine. "Dragon," Drask's voice boomed through the docking bay, amplified by his armor's speakers. "I am Drask the Unstoppable, terror of the outer reaches, destroyer of fleets. Face me in single combat, or I will level this entire station and everyone in it." Cairn appeared at the far end of the docking bay, walking slowly toward Drask. His wings were spread wide and his scales glowed with inner fire. He looked small compared to Drask's augmented bulk, but there was something about the way he moved that spoke of absolute confidence. The docking bay had become an arena. Word of the confrontation had spread through the station's communication systems, and now thousands of beings watched through cameras and monitors. Those who had escaped to the emergency shelters, those sealed safely in their ships, the security forces who had regrouped in defensive positions. All of them watched as Drask and Cairn faced each other across the scarred metal floor. Drask was everything Cairn appeared not to be. Massive, armed with weapons designed to destroy warships. His reputation had been built on violence and conquest across dozens of systems. He had personally killed more beings than most people ever met in their entire lives. His armor was covered in trophies taken from defeated enemies, medals, insignias, bits of ship hull, even bones. Each one represented a victory, a life taken, a battle won. Cairn stood before him looking small and old once again. The glow in his scales had dimmed. His wings hung at his sides. To someone just tuning in, unaware of what had happened in the last hour, he might have looked like a victim, a tired old creature about to be crushed by a superior force. That was exactly what Drask thought he was seeing. "This is what had my pirates running scared?" Drask laughed, the sound harsh and metallic through his armor's speakers. "This is the great guardian everyone is whispering about? You're pathetic. You're old and broken and weak. I'm going to enjoy tearing you apart." Cairn didn't respond. He simply watched Drask with those ancient eyes, patient and calm. Drask raised his plasma cannon and fired. The weapon discharged with a sound like thunder, releasing a bolt of energy that could melt through ship armor. The blast hit Cairn directly in the chest, engulfing him in white-hot plasma. The heat was so intense that the air itself seemed to catch fire. The metal floor beneath the blast melted, running like water. When the plasma cleared, Cairn was still standing. His scales were glowing brighter now, as if the attack had fed him energy rather than harming him. He took a step forward. Drask fired again, and again. Each blast was powerful enough to destroy a building, concentrated into a beam meant to obliterate anything in its path. But Cairn walked through the storm of fire like someone walking through rain. Each step was steady, measured, inevitable. "Impossible," Drask muttered. "Nothing survives that cannon. Nothing." He switched weapons, pulling out a blade forged from rare metals and charged with an energy field that could cut through reinforced blast doors. The blade hummed as he activated it, power crackling along its length. Drask charged forward, his armor's strength enhancers giving him speed that defied his massive size. The blade came down in an overhead strike that would have split Cairn in two. Should have split him in two, but when the weapon connected with Cairn's scales, it simply stopped. The energy field sputtered and died. The rare metal, which could cut through almost anything, couldn't even scratch the dragon's hide. Cairn moved then, finally responding to the attack. His tail swept around, catching Drask's legs and sending the warlord crashing to the ground. The impact was hard enough to crack the floor and send up a cloud of dust and debris. Before Drask could recover, Cairn was on him, one clawed foot pressing down on the chest plate of his armor. The pressure was immense. Drask could hear his armor's structure beginning to buckle, warning alarms screaming in his helmet. He tried to activate his armor's emergency thrusters, tried to bring his weapons to bear, tried everything he could think of to break free. Nothing worked. He was pinned like an insect beneath a boot. "You built your reputation on fear," Cairn said, his voice quiet but carrying across the entire docking bay. "You made beings suffer because you could. You took lives because it was easier than showing mercy. You thought strength meant domination." Drask struggled harder, his augmented muscles straining against the weight holding him down. "Kill me then. Prove you're stronger. Add me to your list of victories." "No," Cairn said, "because that's not what strength is. Real strength is protection, not destruction. Real power is knowing when not to use your full might. I could kill you. I could incinerate you and your entire fleet in seconds. But that would make me no different from you." He lifted his foot, releasing Drask. The warlord scrambled backward, his armor system struggling to reboot after the damage. He looked up at Cairn with something new in his eyes. Not anger or pride, but fear. Real, genuine fear. "You have a choice now," Cairn continued. "You can leave this station and never return. You can take your fleet and your crew and find a different path. Become merchants, explorers, anything but predators. Or you can refuse, and I will remove you from this galaxy permanently, not by killing you, but by ensuring that every system, every station, every authority knows your face and your crimes. You'll spend the rest of your life running from justice." Around the docking bay, Drask's remaining pirates were watching through their ship's cameras. They saw their unstoppable leader defeated without being killed. They saw mercy offered where none was expected. Some of them began to understand what that mercy cost, what strength it took to hold back when striking down would be so much easier. Drask climbed to his feet slowly. His armor was damaged but functional. His weapons were intact. He could still fight, could still try to kill this dragon through sheer determination and firepower. But looking at Cairn, at the patient wisdom in those ancient eyes, Drask finally understood something he had spent his entire violent life refusing to see. Some battles couldn't be won through strength. Some opponents weren't meant to be defeated but learned from. "I accept your terms," Drask said, his voice subdued. "We'll leave." "We won't return," Cairn nodded. "Good, and Drask? The galaxy is larger and more beautiful than you've allowed yourself to see. There are wonders out there that don't require violence to appreciate. Perhaps it's time you learned that." The pirate fleet began to withdraw, their ships pulling away from Station Lumina's docking clamps and forming up for departure. The beings who had been terrorized just hours before watched in stunned disbelief as their attackers simply left, defeated not by superior firepower, but by something they couldn't quite name. Compassion, perhaps, or wisdom. Or the kind of strength that came from knowing when to fight and when to teach. As the last pirate ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, the station erupted in celebration. Emergency shelters opened and beings poured out into the corridors, hugging each other and crying with relief. The residential sectors, which had been scenes of terror, became places of joy as families reunited and neighbors checked on each other. In the docking bay, Cairn stood alone for a moment, watching the stars where Drask's fleet had disappeared. His scales were beginning to dim again, the inner fire banking itself. The transformation was reversing, returning him to the form everyone had known before, the old cargo handler who moved slowly and kept to himself. Owen approached carefully, Captain Reed beside him. The Wayfarer's commander had watched the entire confrontation and was still processing what she had seen. She had served in the human military, had faced combat and danger, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the reality of a living legend. "That was incredible," Owen said. "You saved everyone. The entire station owes you their lives." Cairn turned to look at them, and for just a moment his eyes held that ancient wisdom again. "They owe me nothing. This is what I do. What I have always done. The only difference is that today someone finally needed to see it." Reed stepped forward, her military bearing evident in every movement. "Sir, and I use that term deliberately because that's clearly what you are, the Galactic Council will want to restore your rank. They'll want to give you honors, recognition, a command position befitting your abilities and history." "They already tried that centuries ago," Cairn replied. "I declined then and I decline now. I don't want command. I don't want honors. I just want to be useful." "But you could do so much more," Owen protested. "You could train the next generation of defenders. You could help prepare the galaxy for threats we haven't even imagined yet. I could become what everyone expects," Cairn interrupted gently. "A symbol, a weapon to be pointed at problems, a legend to be put on display. But that's not who I choose to be. I choose to be the being who moves cargo in a forgotten bay, who helps when needed, who serves without requiring recognition." Reed frowned. "With all due respect, that seems like a waste of your abilities." Cairn smiled, showing teeth that could tear through starship hulls. "Is it? Today I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what was required. If I had been off commanding a fleet or sitting in a council chamber, who would have been here to protect these people? Small services matter, Captain Reed. Sometimes the most important position is the one nobody else wants to fill." 3 days after the battle, Station Lumina was still recovering. Repair crews worked around the clock fixing damaged bulkheads, replacing blown conduits, and restoring sections that had been torn apart during the pirate attack. Medical teams treated the wounded, both physical injuries and psychological trauma. Counselors moved through the residential sectors, helping families process what they had experienced. The station administrator had declared a week of reduced operations to allow everyone time to heal. In the cargo bay, things had changed in ways both obvious and subtle. The physical damage had been repaired quickly since this area was critical for station operations. But the atmosphere was completely different. Where before there had been mockery and dismissal, now there was respect tinged with uncertainty. The workers who had laughed at Cairn now gave him space, watching him with something approaching reverence. Cairn didn't like it. He stood by a stack of containers, checking their manifest on a battered data pad. His scales had returned to their dull gray appearance. His wings were folded tight against his back, the patched sections once again hiding their true condition. To someone who hadn't witnessed the battle, he looked exactly as he had before, old, tired, and worn down by time. Hicks approached carefully, his 6 arms carrying a tray with fresh lubricant and replacement parts. The Trill had spent the last 3 days mostly avoiding Cairn, clearly uncomfortable with the new dynamic between them. But duty required communication, and Hicks had finally worked up the courage to speak. "I brought the supplies you requested," Hicks said, his voice much more respectful than it had been before. "For the loader mechanisms. Also, I wanted to apologize again for how I treated you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Cairn took the tray without looking up from his datapad. "You've apologized 4 times now, Hicks. Once was sufficient. We have work to do, and dwelling on the past doesn't move cargo." "I know, but I just..." Hicks trailed off, struggling to put his feelings into words. "Everything is different now. The way people look at you, the way they talk about you, you're famous across the entire station. There are beings who want to touch your scales for luck. Others want to interview you for news programs. The council sent an official delegation offering you a position as sector guardian with full authority and resources. And I declined, as you know, Karen replied. The answer will remain the same no matter how many times they ask. Hicks clicked his mandibles in frustration. But why? You could have anything you want. Respect, power, influence. Instead, you're back here moving boxes like nothing happened. It doesn't make sense. Karen finally looked up, meeting Hicks's compound eyes. Would you respect me more if I demanded special treatment? If I used my abilities to elevate myself above others? If I abandoned this work because I thought it was beneath me? Well, no, Hicks admitted. But you've earned the right to choose something better. I chose this, Karen said patiently. That's what you still don't understand. This isn't a punishment or a default option. This is my choice. Every day I choose to be here, to do this work, to serve in this way. That choice has meaning precisely because I could choose differently. Before Hicks could respond, Owen appeared in the cargo bay entrance. The human engineer had become something of a regular visitor over the past few days, often finding excuses to stop by and talk with Karen. The Wayfarer's repairs were complete, but Captain Reed had decided to stay docked for a few extra days, both to help with station repairs and because Owen had specifically requested the time. Hey, Karen, Owen called out. I have something for you. Well, something I made for you, I should say. Karen set down his datapad, curious despite himself. Owen approached carrying a small box, his expression mixing pride and nervousness. He opened it to reveal a metal scale, polished to a brilliant shine. But it wasn't one of Karen's scales. It was clearly artificial, crafted from some kind of alloy. I know you said you didn't want recognition or honors, Owen explained, and I'm not trying to change your mind about that. But I wanted to make something that represents what I learned from you, so I crafted this from salvaged metal, using techniques I learned during my engineering training. Karen took the scale carefully, examining it in the cargo bay lights. It was beautifully made, with precise edges and a smooth finish that must have taken hours of work. Thank you, Karen said simply. What is its purpose? Owen smiled. It's a reminder. For me, actually, not for you. Every engineer carries tools that remind them of important lessons. This will be mine. It'll remind me that the most important work isn't always the most visible, that value isn't determined by recognition, that choosing to serve, really choosing it rather than being forced into it, is one of the most powerful things a person can do. Karen handed the scale back. Then you should keep it. Let it remind you of those truths. I don't need a physical object to remember why I do what I do. Owen pocketed the scale, nodding his understanding. The Wayfarer leaves tomorrow. Captain Reed got a contract to haul medical supplies to the outer colonies. But I wanted to ask you something before we go. Ask. You said that choosing small service is meaningful. That being exactly where you're needed matters more than grand titles or positions. I believe that, I really do. But what about the future? What happens when another threat comes, something even bigger than Drask? What if the galaxy needs dragons again? Needs guardians who can stand against dangers that regular beings can't handle? Karen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. The galaxy has never stopped needing guardians. But guardians come in many forms. Some breathe fire and tear through starship hulls. Others heal wounds and comfort the frightened. Some guard borders between civilizations. Others protect individuals who would be overlooked by grand heroes focused on grand threats. The key is not having the biggest guardians or the strongest defenders. The key is having guardians everywhere at every level, willing to serve in whatever capacity they're needed. He gestured around the cargo bay. This station has thousands of guardians. The medical staff who treated the wounded. The engineers who repaired the damage. The parents who kept their children calm during the attack. The workers who didn't abandon their posts even when they were afraid. Everyone who chose to help rather than hide, to protect rather than flee. They are all guardians, whether they recognize it or not. Owen considered this. So you're saying we don't need legendary dragons saving the day. We need ordinary beings choosing to be extraordinary. I'm saying, Karen corrected gently, that the distinction between legendary and ordinary is often just a matter of perspective. I am ordinary. I move cargo. I maintain equipment. I exist in a small space doing small tasks. But when needed, I can become what the situation requires. The same is true for every being. You have the capacity for extraordinary actions. Most people do. The question is whether you'll recognize the moment when it arrives and make the choice to act. Hicks, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Is that why you never told anyone what you were? You wanted us to see you as ordinary so we'd understand that ordinary beings can do extraordinary things. Partly, Karen admitted, but also because I genuinely find peace in ordinary work. There is a rhythm to it, a simplicity that I appreciate after centuries of chaos. And because the moment I revealed what I was, everything changed. Look at how you're all treating me now. The distance, the reverence, the uncertainty. I preferred when you simply saw me as a coworker. We can try to go back to that, Hicks offered, though his tone suggested he doubted it was possible. Karen smiled slightly. Perhaps. Or perhaps this is simply the new reality we must all adapt to. Change is inevitable. How we respond to it is what matters. Over the next few hours, work in the cargo bay continued. Ships came and went. Containers were loaded and unloaded. The normal rhythm of station life reasserted itself. Karen worked steadily, and gradually the other workers began to relax around him again, not completely back to how it had been before, but moving in that direction. They asked him questions about proper lifting techniques and optimal cargo arrangements. They shared complaints about the new automated systems. They invited him to join their break rotations. Small things, normal things. The building blocks of ordinary life. That evening, as the shift ended, the station administrator made an unexpected appearance in the cargo bay. She was a stern Keldan woman named Vara, who ran Station Lumina with efficiency and precision. She had been administrator for 20 years, and in that time she had dealt with countless crises and challenges. The pirate attack had been the worst by far. Warden Cairn, she said formally using his proper title, the council's delegation is leaving tomorrow. They asked me to make one final appeal. They're offering you a position as chief guardian of the border reaches, with full autonomy and unlimited resources. They'll give you anything you want, ships, soldiers, technology. They'll restore all your old titles and create new ones. They're begging you to accept. Karen finished securing a cargo container before turning to face her. And you? What do you think I should do? Vara was quiet for a moment, her scaled face thoughtful. Honestly, I think you should do exactly what you want to do. Not what the council wants, not what makes sense politically or strategically. What you want. Because in my 20 years running this station, I've learned that the beings who are genuinely happy in their work are the ones who make the biggest difference, regardless of what that work is. A wise perspective, Karen said. So what do you want? Karen looked around the cargo bay, taking in the stacked containers, the loading equipment, the scuffed floors, and flickering lights. It wasn't beautiful or glamorous. It was just a workspace, functional and plain, but it was his workspace where he had spent decades in peaceful service. I want to be here tomorrow morning, Karen said. I want to move cargo and maintain equipment and help new workers learn the systems. I want to have lunch with Hicks and the others and listen to them complain about their shifts. I want to fix broken loaders and organize manifest schedules. I want ordinary days filled with ordinary work. And I want to know that if another threat comes, I'll be here, ready to protect this place and these people again. That's what I want, Vera nodded slowly. Then that's what you'll have. I'll inform the council that your answer is final. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. This station is safer knowing you're here, whether you're moving cargo or fighting pirates. Both matter. Both are necessary. After she left, Karen stood alone in the quiet cargo bay. The shift had ended, and the other workers had gone to their quarters or the recreation areas. Tomorrow would bring new ships, new cargo, new tasks. It would be an ordinary day, filled with ordinary work. That thought made Karen happier than any title or honor could have. He looked down at the metal tag around his neck, reading the words that Owen had translated days before. Warden Cairn, 7th Flame, Defender of the Border Reaches, Guardian of 300 Worlds. And at the bottom, the line that mattered most. Voluntary service continuation. No rank recognition required. Those words defined him more than any legend or story ever could. He served because he chose to serve. He protected because protection was needed. He remained ordinary because ordinary work had value. And if the galaxy ever truly needed a dragon again, he would be ready. But until that moment came, he would be exactly where he belonged, in a forgotten cargo bay on a trading station, moving containers and maintaining equipment, a guardian hiding in plain sight. waiting patiently for the moment when his strength would be needed again. Some heroes wore shining armor. Some flew magnificent ships, some stood at the forefront of galactic politics, and some moved cargo in dim bays content to serve in silence. Their greatest strength not in their power but in their choice to use that power only when truly necessary. Cairn powered down the cargo bay lights, locked the doors and headed to his small quarters in the maintenance section. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day. He looked forward to it,